morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. For you first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is we have decided to talk about, or whatever comes up that seems interesting, and we'll talk about it anyhow, okay? And my guest this evening is John Schweikert. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Schweibert. With a B, yeah. Schweibert.
Ah, sorry about that. And I have it spelled properly on the screen too, Schweibert, yeah. And he was pressed into service because my guest schedule for this evening got the flu. So we got you pretty quick, and I'm so glad you were available to come over and talk about your work with the post office and whatever else comes up, as I said a minute ago.
Okay.
And how are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling pretty relaxed and had a good meal, and so I'm ready to talk.
Good, good. I'm a little nervous as usual, but there's something about you that makes me relax too. And then I found out you're a man of the cloth.
Well, that's one way to put it, yes.
So as you know, the show goes into 2 major segments. The first is what I call the bio segment, where we talk about who you are personally, so the viewers can have an idea where you're coming from when you have an opinion about something. That'll come up in the second half of the show. So let's jump right into it. And if I ask you a question that you don't care to answer, you can just say I don't want to talk about that.
Okay.
You're easy to be with. You're going to relax me before I relax you.
Okay, good.
Okay, I have a trick question now and then that I ask to catch my guest off guard. To see
Oh boy.
From. You ready?
I'm ready.
Can we start off with a trick question?
Go ahead.
John, if I were to ask your best friend, who is John, what would your best friend say? John is, be your best friend.
Well, he's a pastor, but he's kind of a nonconformist, and he's different. He's not like the stereotype of a clergy person. Has some different opinions and different convictions, and he sticks to them. I hope that's what they'd say.
Yeah, okay. So, when and where were you born?
I was born in Boise, Idaho in 1938. And that's where I spent most of my early life. Went to high school in Colville, Idaho. Graduated from the College of Idaho, which is in my hometown. And left there to go to theological seminary. I went all the way back to New Jersey, but the whole 3 years I was there, had a great desire to come back to the West.
Okay.
But the West turned out to be, for me, not Idaho. I served 2 years as a pastor there, but then I got over to Oregon, and I've been here ever since.
Ever since? Yeah. Why were you born?
Why? Why was I born?
That's 2 trick questions in a row.
That's a very good question. Well, I feel like we're all born to some kind of calling, some kind of vocation. And early on I began to know that my vocation had something to do with religious faith and with leadership in the church. I grew up in a Methodist family. A Methodist church was my home, and so I have been affiliated with the Methodist church and a pastor in that denomination for my entire life.
A calling.
A calling, yes.
Where did that calling come from?
Well, I say it comes from God. But if people, I know other people talk about calling and don't use those terms, and I'm fine with that. I just think that for many of us, there's a sense that we're not really fully engaged or fully satisfied until we're doing something that is meaningful, and that maybe we are especially being equipped to do. So I like that idea of being called.
I'm from an old-fashioned conservative Catholic background. I was an altar boy for years. And I've been a humanist minister for about 40 years. But I'm not sure I had a calling or who called me. but I'm not going to throw the cards away because I'm not sure. I'm a skeptic.
Right, right,
Yeah.
okay.
I do believe that my calling is to be KFC. That's my philosophy now, kind, friendly, and charitable.
Mm.
And
And you're happy?
Yeah,
Okay.
with what I'm doing. And anything significant about your cultural heritage that's worth sharing with the viewers?
Well, my grandfather was German and was born in Germany. I remember him as a child. I mean, when I was a child, very broken German, hard to understand, but that's my heritage. I studied Little German in college, but I can't say that I've carried through on that heritage particularly. I'm just one of those that has become a part of this salad that's the American culture, I guess.
I'm to typify the American salad right now.
Mm-hmm.
My mother's background was German,
Mm-hmm.
and there's black and red involved, and we don't go into that right now.
Okay.
I'm from New Orleans. That says it all.
Okay.
And your education, you mentioned you went to college back east?
Drew University is a university of very high reputation in Madison, New Jersey.
Yes.
And they have a theological school that also has an excellent reputation, and especially did when I was there back in 1960 through 1963. Some wonderful teachers there. And I had a tremendous theological education.
Did you enhance its reputation, your being there?
I don't think I contributed much while I was there. I didn't blossom till after I graduated, but just a little over a month ago I went back for my 50th anniversary of my
50th.
graduation from seminary, where I got a Master of Divinity degree. And I had a chance to reflect about that 50 years since I graduated, and I think that it took a while, but I took a lot of what I learned there and began to fashion my own understanding of theology and begin to, I think, make some significant contributions.
Your own understanding of theology. Can you say a few words about that? Your own personal understanding of theology?
Well, theology, of course, is some people call it faith-seeking understanding, but theology is about thinking about God, and my strong conviction that God is a God of love and justice, that God is not a harsh judge. God is bending over backwards to try to love us back into a way of living together that will enhance the world. I mean, Jesus called it the kingdom of God, by which he meant anything else but the kingdoms that we human beings try to put together and don't do a very good job with.
Yeah. And you were a pastor.
I was a pastor, and I went into very typical institutional churches appointed by the bishop. That's the way it works in the United Methodist Church. You're under appointment, and I served several small rural congregations, and I began to change in the sense that I felt like I was being called to urban ministry, and I began to, in my own thinking, picture myself in an urban setting. And so when the opportunity was presented to move to Portland, I seized that opportunity, and that was 41 years ago. So I've been in Portland most of the time. That was one thing, but the other thing is that I began to develop a different vision of church and what it was supposed to be, which was not like the institutional churches that I was a part of and that I was offering leadership to, but was more like the churches that were described in the New Testament, where people shared everything in common, where the leadership grew out of the congregations themselves, people were not theologically trained, but they were theologically centered, and leadership, because the Spirit of God worked within those congregations, the people found, again, what they were individually and particularly called to, so that they could support the body that they were a part of.
Is God a socialist?
Yes. Well, I have to qualify that.
Yeah.
Would not probably join a particular socialist party, but it seems to me that you can't escape that in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mhm.
And Jesus, of course, was nothing else. Was Jesus a capitalist?
No.
Okay.
I think when Jesus said you can't serve God and money, he was
Baham.
being very cautious about what money does to us when we begin to worship it too much.
Yeah.
And maybe even would be happy if we didn't have money at all, because it gets us kind of off the track. So, I mean, that's the kind of the ways I think that sometimes get me in trouble, but
It's a good trouble, isn't it?
set me apart. Yeah,
I feel similarly.
it's part of my calling, so I have to go with it.
So you're retired.
I'm retired now. I officially retired about 10 years ago, because in the United Methodist Church there's a pension fund that you contribute to through the years, and I reached the age when I was entitled to start collecting that pension, so I did that. But then I kept right on doing what I was doing, because I was called to do it. And it was only till a little over a year ago that I had, well, earlier than that, but a year ago, I just stopped altogether. It felt like that, as I've been called to do that for many years, I was now being called to turn that over to other people and just enjoy my retirement. That's not to say I don't do things, but I'm not preaching regularly, and I'm not taking the responsibilities that I had as a pastor.
Do you miss it?
Not a whole lot. I mean, it's fun to think about back of it, but sometimes people will call me up and say, would you come over and preach at our church? And I say, thanks for asking, but I don't do that anymore. And it's a good feeling, and I think my family appreciates that too.
So what else do you do in your retirement?
I am a resident of the 18th Avenue Peace House, which is a commune, really, a living community. And
say that again, the 18th Avenue?
18th Avenue Peace House.
That's in Portland.
In Portland. It's about a
commune.
half mile from here. It's real close.
Uh-huh.
And we started it back in 1986.
That's a while ago.
Yes, and it's been active. It's committed to peacemaking. It's committed to hospitality. It's committed to just modeling the fact that people can live together and overcome differences. And 4 of us that were part of the original 7 that started are still living together after all these years.
After all those years?
Yeah.
About how many members do you have now?
Well, there are
roughly?
8 people living in the house, but we counted up the other day that during that period of 27 years, we've had over 100 different people who have come and lived there as more than just guests for a period of time. Some came because they were in a transition from one part of their life to the next. Some came because they really wanted to live in community and stayed for 10, 12 years. And then because of changes like marriage or something else, or being having to leave to go to a job in another place, moved out. But always there was someone else that came along. And so we've had a really unique life, I think, in that sense.
Did you have a leader periodically of the whole group, the house? Manager or something? Or what?
I think that my wife, Pat, and I have been more of managers than anyone else, but there were other people in the household always that were willing to share the leadership, and we were making a lot of decisions by consensus. And sometimes it felt like the leader turns out to be the servant, not the person who's above everybody else, but the person that makes sure all the work gets done.
I bet you've got some stories.
Lots of stories, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And part of it is that now, after all these years, see, we started this when we were much younger, and now we're getting old, and there are 3 people in their 80s. I'm 75 myself, and my wife is 68, and we've got 2 other people in their 60s. Actually, we've got 4 in the 80s now, so we're kind of unusual, you know. Hippie commune maybe a long time ago, but now we're just old hippies.
About senior citizens, hippies, huh?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. How about your children? Did you have children?
We have children. My wife Pat and I have 4 children, 2 and 2 from previous marriages, and they were teenagers when we started this venture, and were not with us very long before they moved out on their own.
Mm-hmm.
But I should say too that before we started this community in 1986, ever since we were married in 1975, we lived in another community. So my wife and I have never lived alone anywhere. Our whole marriage we've lived with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife likes to say sometimes maybe we wouldn't have made it if we hadn't been living with other people.
Oh, I'll bet you would.
I think what she meant was that you have to work things out if you've got other people watching, and it's kind of motivating to have support from other people too when you're going through difficulties.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Through the years, any memories occur to you of some significant event to do with the kind of style of living that you've done all these years?
Yeah, back in the 90s, when AIDS
HIV
became HIV became a really big thing. Of course, it was earlier than that, but by the mid 90s, we knew a lot of people who had AIDS, and we started saying to people with AIDS, some of whom were gay and did not have families that were supportive, and they were really in the process of dying.
Yes.
And so we said, well, why don't you come and live with us, and we weren't a hospice. We didn't have any license or anything like that, but my wife particularly has some skills in hospice care. She's a nurse, and so we said, you just come and become a part of our community, and you bring whatever resources you have, and we'll put our resources with it, and we'll take care of each other. And so we wound up over a period of time, starting with people with AIDS, but then other people too, about 30 different people. Of that, more than 100 that I mentioned were actually people who came knowing that they were getting close to the end. So we were in community with them and walked with them through that dying process. And I think that was a tremendously rich experience. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't have traded that for anything.
Yeah, it shows in your eyes.
Thank you.
You're a gentle man. They're so rare anymore, I think. Anyhow, let's continue on.
Okay.
Some people get upset with my next question, but I don't think you will. Your political persuasion, or your left, right, center, or off the end of the continuum, or what?
Well, I think I'm left, but it's interesting that I come to that again through being a follower of Jesus. So I'm not real conversant with all of the arguments that are given by typical people,
of course,
on the left side of the political spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read a lot in that area, but I constantly find myself resonating with people on the left, certainly much more than on the right.
Yeah.
And particularly on the religious right. I don't have any way of relating to that way of thinking.
How did you come to be the way you are in terms of your religious persuasion and the life you've led so far? What went on your childhood or your genes even that has you being the kind of person you are, walking in Jesus' footsteps, if I may?
Well, I'll say it was largely it had to do with the commitment of my parents for one thing. Although my father was a Republican, he was a moderate Republican. They don't have very many of those anymore, but
Jake Javits.
He actually ran for Congress. He was in the Idaho State Legislature, ran for Congress, but I think he introduced me to a deep concern for social issues, the things that affect people's lives and justice and so on. I came to find out later that I became more radical than my father, and we had some healthy arguments, I think, over some things. But he eventually had to leave the Republican Party just because there was no room for him there, and so there was that. But I think a lot of it is reading the New Testament and asking the questions. You know, if Jesus invited people to follow him and to enter into a community that was communal, why are we so afraid to do that? Why is it that people in the churches I was attending would feel like that they could just dismiss something like that by saying, well, that's communism, and of course we don't do communism. And then I begin to realize how much we have been conformed to cultural values in America rather than paying attention to the one we say we follow in the church, which is Jesus.
My heroes, my viewers have heard me say this 1,000 times, my heroes, of course, being a humanist, are Jesus and Gandhi and Martin Luther King and a few others, the same, cut from the same cloth.
How about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a great German?
Yes, first they came for, and then I didn't speak up. Memberships in political, social, or civic organizations. Do you have any of those memberships worth mentioning?
Well, our house, 18th Avenue Peace House, and Metanoia Peace Community, which was the church that I was pastor of for that same 26 years. Metanoia Peace Community. Our congregation was a member of the Metropolitan Alliance for Common Good. So that's been a primary association for me in Portland. Broad-based community organizing, which it's an alliance of labor unions, churches, Catholic and Protestant, synagogues, and other community organizations that is figuring out ways how to change our metropolitan area to make it more fair to more people.
Social justice, any persons from the past or alive today that you particularly admire or admired? Any names come to mind except for Jesus, you mentioned, Bonhoeffer?
Well, I'm going to mention another German, and wouldn't you know, I'm having a hard time recalling his name, but he started
75 years
a communal movement called the Bruderhof in Germany, and it's over 80 years old now, I guess, but they renounced Hitler, and the leader of that group got into trouble. In fact, the whole community got in trouble because they said that their young men would not serve in the German military, and they had to leave. And they went to first of all to Luxembourg, and then eventually to England. And they didn't find acceptance there because they were Germans, and there was a tension. And so they wound up going to Paraguay, and were there for a while. And then they came to the United States. And they've been living in communities. Would be communities of up to 250 people in one community who shared all things in common, and raised their kids, and in remarkable community.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't know much about him, but you asked me who I respected, so
of course,
that was
yeah.
Eberhard Arnold was the name of the leader of that group in Germany.
Well, let's take a break for a few minutes earlier, and then we'll go into the things that you want to talk about. If there's anything left over, I might mention something, but you're so easy to talk with, I'm sure there won't be much time left.
Okay.
So, Mr. Director, can we take a break now? Okay, I guess we're back. For your first-time viewers, if you're late tuning in, you're watching Conversations with Dr. Don. It's an ongoing series of one-hour talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there, and like my guest here, John. Should I call you Pastor or Reverend or John?
Just call me John. I'm happy with that.
Yeah. And so far we've been talking to John about who he is and where he came from, and now we're going to talk about the things that he suggested we visit about. Will you start? What do you want to...
Are we ready to talk about the post office yet?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay.
Look at Mike. Hey, Mike.
I became interested several years ago. I was invited to be on a public panel called the Workers' Rights Board. And this is a panel which is convened when there are certain labor issues that come up in the community, and there's an invitation for those who care about them to come together and offer testimony about what's going on, and then for the Workers' Rights panel to listen to that.
Sure.
And make some kind of pronouncement at the end about what they think would be a just resolution of that issue. As you might expect, most of the people who give testimony are working people, people who are frustrated because they feel like they're not receiving justice as workers. And even though management people are invited to participate in those, they often don't. But in any case, I was invited to be on these panels, and so I got to listen to postal workers who were reporting what was happening to the Postal Service and how it appeared that Congress and people from the private sector were trying to cripple the Postal Service. And the people who are working in the post office could see this happening because they could see positions being cut and service being compromised, and they were alarmed by it, and they saw it not only as a threat to working people but a threat to the country, because if the Postal Service is privatized, then a lot of the benefit that it offers as a public service would be compromised. And so I became interested in that, and I started working. Shortly after that, there was a group formed called Communities and Postal Workers United, which brings together people from the community like myself and people who are in postal service unions. And we've been working at that. Now, I've been involved for a couple of years now. And so we're trying to do things to call the public's attention to what's going on, and why we're in the situation we're in, and why there's a lot of misperception about what's happening with the Postal Service.
Why are we in this present situation that we're in with the Postal Service, and what looks like their attempt, government's attempt to privatize it? Why is that?
I think the reason is that private enterprises know that the Postal Service really is a very successful enterprise.
Oh yes.
And they'd like to have a piece of it. And
greed.
Greed is there, I believe, but it's kind of like so many other things that are being privatized. There's people that want to privatize education, people who want to privatize prisons, and the Postal Service is a part of that general thing. And the way a sort of myth is created that the government can't handle it anymore, and see how bad the government is doing. Actually, the United States Postal Service is held up as a model of postal services throughout the world.
What about all this money they're supposed to pay off ahead of time to prevent a catastrophe 20 years from now?
Well, that's part of it. See, when the Postal Service was created, I think it was back in 1975, Congress said, okay, we're run the Postal Service like a business. Mm-hmm. And they did it, and it was very successful. And then when Congress saw that, under pressure, again from the private sector, began to think of ways to restrict the Postal Service. And one of the restrictions was to say to the Postal Service, and Congress did this, say in the mid-90s, or mid-2000s, I think, 2005, something like that.
Yeah.
You must pre-fund your pension fund for 75 years out. So in other words, have enough money on hand to be able now to pay the pension of people who aren't even hired yet, in fact, who aren't even born yet. And that has put a huge burden on the back of the Postal Service. So, for instance, just recently, the announcement was made by the Postal Service that they were hopelessly in debt. And a lot of people say, oh, that's because of mismanagement, or that's because people use the internet and don't mail letters anymore. But in truth, the reason for that is because of that burden that's been placed upon it by Congress.
They've got to salt away a certain amount of money
Mm-hmm.
toward that impossible goal.
Yes.
Do you know of any other corporation in America that has that sort of a burden on them?
Absolutely not, no.
And Congress passed this.
And Congress passed that,
Why do you
yes.
think Congress did that?
Well, I think to weaken the Postal Service. It's hard to take over. It's harder for the private sector to take over something like the Postal Service if it's strong. In fact, those who have looked at the figures say that if it weren't for that burden that was placed against the Postal Service, it would have made $6 million profit. It depends on how you do the accounting.
Oh, Congress is supposedly speaking for citizens like you and I, and if they want to, I can't imagine somebody who's responsible, being a congressman or a senator, voting for something that's going to cause the difficulty that it's causing for the Postal Service and the wonderful American tradition that we have in the Postal Service. Are they being
The only
paid,
question I would
paid by
ask is,
somebody else?
does the government represent the people, or does it represent the dollars that are contributed to the members of Congress?
What's your answer?
I think the money is running everything.
Uh-huh.
And Congress can hardly hear what people are saying
Yeah.
when the money is speaking.
What do we need to do about that?
Well, some of us believe that massive civil disobedience is going to be necessary. Unfortunately, there aren't many people are ready to join a mass movement of civil disobedience.
You are an old lefty.
Well, in fact,
I agree with you.
locally in the Communities and Postal Workers United, we have been doing civil disobedience on a very small scale. It's mostly like becoming an irritant to the management of the Postal Service and to the private sector people who they're working with, because even locally the privatization process is already going on. There are
A little at a time.
a little at a time. There are small private outfits that are being hired to transport mail, for instance, trucks. and there are small companies that handle mail, like in the at the airport. Private companies. Recently, they arranged or are arranging to have postal sorting machines moved out of Postal Service facilities and into private facilities so that private companies can sort the mail.
Wow. How come the mainstream media does not tell us what you're telling me right now, and I believe you?
Who pays for the mainstream media? You know, I think we underestimate what huge control the corporatocracy has over our political system. We really don't have a democracy anymore. I'm sorry to say.
I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, corporatocracy, or
or a dollarocracy is a term that's being used now too.
Do you see a massive civil disobedience or non-cooperation occurring in the near future, the next 10 or 20 years?
I haven't given up hope on it, but
I never give up hope.
I think the Occupy movement was a step in the right direction, and it hasn't completely gone away. I think there's people trying to figure things out and waiting for the right time, and learning a lot while they're waiting. And so I think maybe there is a possibility of you know, there was a postal workers strike back at the time before the Postal Service was created, a wildcat strike that involved thousands of postal workers. Surprised everybody, surprised the leadership of the unions, because it wasn't done under their auspices, but it was people who had had enough and rose up, and they earned concessions by doing that. And was it President Nixon who thought that he could just bring in the National Guard and have them sort the mail, and found out that sorting mail isn't that easy.
You mentioned the Go ahead.
Yeah, there needs to be something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned the Occupy movement. Will you say a few words about the Occupy movement? What it's about?
Well, I think it understood that we can't have the same political system that we've been working with, and expect that it's going to be able to do something significant, and so genuinely begin to think about a whole different way of organizing. And I think it was exciting for some of us older folks to see that happening. My wife and I, the first night after the encampment in downtown Portland,
Occupy movement encampment in downtown Portland.
When we went home and went to bed that night, we say, you know, they're going to need coffee in the morning. So we got up. We have a bunch of big coffee pots that we use, because at the Peace House we do a lot of hospitality.
Sure.
So we filled those up with hot coffee and took them down. Showed up just as it was getting light outside, and people were waking up, and they were so excited to have coffee there. And so we wound up doing that every morning during that entire encampment, getting up early in the morning, making a bunch of coffee and taking it down. But in the process, we had some interesting conversations with younger people. And one of them, I remember a young woman who came up and gave each of us a big hug, and she said, "Oh, we're so glad you're here." And my wife said, "Oh, you mean because we're old?" And she said, "Oh, no. Oh, well, yes." And there was also a young man who came up, and my wife said to him, "We've been waiting for you guys." And he looked kind of sheepish. He said, "Yes, well, I guess for a long time there we were just playing with our Xboxes and not paying attention." But he was saying, in effect, that he'd become politicized, radicalized, and was ready to do something. And so we felt like an instant connection with those people that were doing that, and opened up our house, our 18th Avenue Peace House, for activities by Occupy, and got to meet some wonderful young people. tremendous idealism. Some of them may have underestimated the hard political work that's got to be done, but we could use that spirit that they have.
How many lists is your name on by the federal government?
I have no idea.
You're
I'm not,
sort of a socialist, a rebel or something.
I try not to worry about it. I think that fear is one of the greatest tools that the establishment has. If they can make us afraid, then they've got us. But if we're not afraid, I think we learned that from Gandhi and others, Martin Luther King Jr. The most powerful thing we can do is be able to say no to injustice. And
the greatest thing we need to fear is fear itself.
Oh yeah,
FDR.
Sure.
Is there something going on in other parts of the world similar to what's going on in America in terms of Occupy and those kinds of budding or beginning revolutions against the existing system, like the Arab Spring?
Yeah, certainly. I think there are, and I scarcely know about all of them. And there's stuff stirring. Yeah, we'll see some results from it, I trust.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a bunch of protest signs that I've made over the years. I probably have number 50 or so. If you go to my website, they're all listed there. And the one comes to mind now is, the answer is worldwide wealth control.
Mm-hmm.
And they're on that order and the simplicity, but you've got to look closely, and it provokes thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I have some wonderful discussions in Fred Meyer and public places when I wear my signs,
mm-hmm.
and the reactions are always interesting. And I guess the most important consideration is there's some exchange or some talking between me and somebody else,
mm-hmm.
whether they agree with me or not.
Sure.
Because even if they disagree, hopefully I present my argument, my position in such a way that it provokes them to think.
Mm-hmm.
And when they leave and go away, perhaps they will see things a little more my way, which is the absolute right way, of course.
Yeah. And I have to say, I think one of the really important things about the Occupy movement is that it embraces the principle of nonviolence and recognizes that nonviolence is not something that comes out of weakness, but out of tremendous strength.
Yes.
And nonviolence is a force that's more powerful than violence. And I think that bodes well for the future, the fact that there are people that know this and are ready to act nonviolently when they see where are the points where they can act.
Yeah. So empires are fading around the globe, and different parts of the world take their turn in having their empire disappear. They build it up and it disappears. Mm-hmm. And most people are conservative or right-wing, insist that America will last forever, just as it is today. And history shows it's right there for you to see.
Mm-hmm.
And my question then is, do you see the American empire diminishing in its power and influence, even as it has hundreds of bases around the world, and on the surface it looks like it's expanding its power in global governance? What do you think of the do you see an American empire as I do?
Yes, empires eventually fall. Mm-hmm. The American empire can do a whole lot of damage before it falls, but it will fall.
Yeah. Is it doing damage today?
Absolutely. I mean, having over 1,000 military installations throughout the world is just unconscionable. Presenting ourselves as being policing the world and making the world safer is a huge myth. Sending drones in to kill people in other countries, unconscionable. Trying to rule by force and influence and direct the affairs of other governments, unconscionable.
Another sign I've got that I wear sometimes, depending on my mood when I'm going out into the world, is outlaw killer drones worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
And I get in some pretty good discussions about that.
Sure, I
And
imagine.
the argument I oftentimes get is that, well, we've got to take them out before they come after us. Well, they're coming after us because the chickens are coming home to roost.
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I'm grinding my axe now.
Okay.
Shall we go to another subject that you mentioned? Communal living, peace community.
Well, I have to say, in the experience my wife and I, a big thing has been military tax resistance.
Yes.
We woke up in the 70s realizing that, well, my wife would never have been drafted anyway. I escaped the draft because of deferments.
Mm-hmm.
And I never had to think about the fact of whether I was a conscientious objector to war or not. But when I began to think about it, when she began to think about it, we said, we're not being asked to serve, but we're being asked to contribute money to the defense enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yes.
really a military, violent
Yes.
military endeavor, and that we weren't willing to do that. Now it's hard not to when you pay taxes, but
Yes.
we for many years refused to pay the military percentage of the tax, and instead donated that money to some enterprise that was doing good for people.
And the federal government let you get away with that?
No. We found out the extent of what they could do because they took money out of bank accounts. They garnished money from income. And at one point, they took the house that we owned and put it up for sale in a sealed bid auction. We were saved from losing the house because a friend of ours walked into the IRS and said, "How much do John and Pat Schweibert owe on this house?" And they told him, and he took out his billfold and gave him the cash to pay that. And we were upset at first that he'd done that because we were determined to fight it and to remain in the house even if somebody else bought it and refused to leave. But that didn't happen. He had his conviction about that, and he was a pacifist himself and was supportive, but he didn't want to see us lose that house. But we didn't owe any money to the IRS at that point, so that's when we saw the house where we live now, which is the 18th Avenue Peace House. We bought the house with another couple, and then we turned the house over to Metanoia Peace Community Church, just deeded it to the church, so we didn't own anything. We became, at that point, not owners of private property. So we had nothing that the IRS could seize. And eventually, by living in communities, we're living below a taxable income and not having to worry about the IRS. The other part of the story is that when I retired and started getting a pension, we went up above the taxable income again. So I had to try to resolve that. That's a long story, but eventually I asked the Board of Pensions to pay me half as much per month. In other words, to cut my pension in half. And they were willing to do that, and that means that we don't get that money. We'll never see that money, but the IRS will never see it either. So they take a little money out of our Social Security each month, what they're legally entitled to do, and they take a little money out of my pension. But we owe many thousands of dollars, except in one sense we don't owe it. I mean, you can argue it, but we've been taking the money that we've refused to pay every year and going down to the Multnomah County Commission and donating the money to the county. We're not against paying taxes. We believe in the responsibility of citizens to pay taxes, but we're just unwilling to cooperate with financing this huge military enterprise that's scattered around the whole world. So it's that's part of our way of saying no to empire.
Wow.
Yeah.
What depth you have, what compassion, what sensitivity, empathy, and you're living it.
We're trying to. A lot of people don't see it that way, but
I
that's what we're
admire
trying
you.
to do. Yeah.
I admire you a bunch. We have just a couple of minutes left. Anything more you want to talk about for a minute or two?
Well, we talked about the fact that we live in community. I would like to maybe invite listeners to think about that. Our testimony is that living in community is a rich experience, and you can save a whole lot of money by doubling up and using the...
Talk to, which camera shall we look in over there so that you can tell the viewers?
Oh, over there, yeah.
Number 3, yeah.
Consider living in community.
Yes, yes.
More and more young people are doing it, but I don't see any reason why older people can't find delight in that too. I think we have to start undoing this culture of isolation and individualism that we've gotten into, and find the joys of living with other people. If you want to know more about it, look up the 18th Avenue Peace House. Call me, and I'd be glad to share.
And your email address is up on the screen. Yeah.
Oh, that should be tearsoup, SOUP.com. John at tearsoup.com.
SOUP, tearsoup, TEARSOUP. I apologize for that.
It's okay.
Tearsoup. Normally we check that out before we start the cameras rolling, but we started late. That's why I am embarrassed about that. But in the next few minutes, we have drone proliferation. What's going to happen when drones are all over the world and being operated by other countries? What are we going to do about that?
I don't know that I can predict. I think we've got to have some kind of treaty, if we, the United States, is willing to enter into it, that drones will not be used for military purposes, but probe the ways in which they can be used for the common good.
Yes.
It seems like it's inevitable that there's going to be a whole industry. There is a whole industry of this kind of robotics, but it's like any other thing. We need to find the peaceful uses for the technology that we have, and I guess we probably have to show and demonstrate that for private corporations there can be a profit in making things for the common good rather than making them things that just get blown up or which blow up other things.
Yeah. Now, when I'm thinking about it, you have my email address. That's correct. So if you want to learn more about how to get in touch with John directly, you can call me or email me, and I will tell you his correct email address. I'm still embarrassed about that. But whistleblowers. What do you think of whistleblowers?
I'm proud of people who take on that responsibility. If it's a form of civil disobedience, more power to them. I think that it takes that in order to break through this governmental privilege that has developed. We got to open up the process. If it's going to be a democracy, people have to know about what's going on.
When this show is done, you're going to be added to another list.
Okay.
And money in politics, we know how you feel about that. What do you think about, is there too much money in politics, or do we need more money in politics?
I think zero money in politics would be pretty good. I don't see any reason why we couldn't have our government allocate the cost of equal TV advertisement to every candidate.
Yeah.
And and remind ourselves it's the people that's making the decision, not the people with money.
Well, we're running out of time, so we better get ready to sign off. We have a few public service announcements, and I want to thank you for coming on, and you were a surprise guest, and you were as good as or better than the guy you replaced.
Well, thank you. It's been fun being here. Yeah.
So let's put a few PSAs up on the screen, Mr. Ellery. To watch my shows on the web, Google Don Baham, YouTube, and there's hundreds of shows up there where I've interviewed all kinds of people, people like John here, and students and professors, and to get my shows on the web. Oh, I've got to tell you about the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. Without the ACLU, our civil liberties would really be down the tubes by now. Mm-hmm. I'm glad we have the American Civil Liberties Union. We got to end corporate personhood. Go to www.movetoamend.org, and to show that corporations are not persons and money is not speech. Humanists and humanism. Go to the American Humanist Association.org website and learn about humanists and humanism. And I assure you they're as valuable as Protestants. The Alliance for Democracy. Go to the national website. That's a great organization that works for social justice and things that are important for the welfare of the community. And the Portland chapter is www.afd-pdx.org, and learn more about our chapter. And the Populist Dialogues is a show put on by my friend David Delk. He has the Populist Dialogues, a show that talks about the same kinds of issues that the organization is involved in. And click on AFD videos. Do we have anything more? Oh, I got to ask you to remember KFC. Not that KFC, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable. To you too. And you too. And you too. Thanks again for watching. Good night.